Hi, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the community capacity building initiative that we're working on. Not only is this a part of what we're trying to do within the Department of the Interior, we're working with a lot of other partners, FEMA, EPA, Health and Human Services, Environmental Development, Economic Development Administration, et cetera, NGOs, schools, and looking forward to the opportunity to continue to work with your school on this effort and developing new initiatives that we can work on together. So one of the big challenges that I've seen over my career, and I've had a lot of conversations with other federal employees about, is that there are so many different federal resources, including funding, that are available to support communities in need, but it's so often that the communities that really need the help aren't the ones getting it. And the reason for that is because underserved communities often lack the capacity to both search for and apply for resources. It's not that they don't want to, it's not that they're not capable of, it's that they really just don't have the capacity to spend time doing this type of work and trying to apply for grants. One of the I think best examples to share is I was meeting with a tribal community up in Wyoming a few years ago, and we were looking at how we can provide support. When I was talking to the person who also is their grant writer, they're the one who's managing the wastewater treatment facility, the drinking water treatment facility. They're doing all of the environmental compliance. They were doing a whole bunch of planning, and essentially their job should be 15 jobs, and it's all on one person. So there's often just a really massive capacity issue. And so in trying to figure out how to address this and being creative, we are seeking to develop partnerships across federal agencies, state agencies, non-government organizations. We're working with a few private companies, colleges and universities to create this network of support for underserved communities. And looking at the continuum, because some communities may have a plan of what they want and they just need support with researching and writing grants. Some communities might not have had a chance to catch a breath and to really think about and plan their projects. A lot of schools are already working on this experiential learning. There's a lot of capstone projects. I know when I was in school, we had multiple projects that were working with communities. And there's a lot of technical assistance, but how do we get it across the finish line? So the support that we provide and we're trying to provide is the technical assistance to develop projects, as well as researching and assisting with grant writing. Because we want to meet the communities where they are and try to help address their needs, we're trying to figure out the best ways that we need to provide support for each unique community. Some of the examples of work that we're doing is developing designs and cost estimates for construction type projects. Apologize. We are working on the design for a community center for a village up in Alaska that will be used as a cultural center and a hub for their community. We are working on a project to look at an alternative source of water for drinking water for a community in Colorado that relies heavily on the Colorado River for the drinking source. And as a result of the fires that we had this past year, their drinking water has a high risk of being contaminated every time we have significant snowmelt, spring flooding, rain events during our monsoons. And so we're working with a school to help design an alternative drinking water system that can be used as a backup. We are also working on a land use plan with two colleges are actually involved in this effort up in Alaska, looking at how to integrate all of these projects that the community wants to work on and trying to kind of bridge the gap of where we have the ability to have students who are focusing on planning, working with the faculty from both their schools in Virginia, as well as working with someone who knows Alaska very well at the University of Anchorage. We're working on community engagement projects, looking at big challenges, taking those big giant knots that some of you are already looking at in the work that you do, and trying to bring in additional resources. So are there ways that we can look at this at a problem and figure out what additional technical support can we provide from the federal government? Can you all provide from your school? Can NGOs provide, et cetera? And then working through together to identify potential needs that could potentially be funded through grants. A lot of you are already working on projects that could potentially result in a project that could be implemented if the funding was available. Can we work together to identify students and help to build out those grant packages so that we can get the resources to the students? So one of the biggest component and where we kind of started with this effort was really on grant research and writing. And a little bit more about my background. So when I was in grad school, I didn't have the ability to do a 9-to-5 unpaid internship. I had to pay my bills. I had to work, a minimum wage job to be able to pay my rent. And so I didn't have the ability to go to DC or go somewhere and have some of the experiences that my other fellow students were having. I actually did grant writing. And if I can do it, anyone can. Essentially, all of your students are focusing on, they're doing research and they're writing for all of you anyways. And a lot of times, a grant is really writing to the prompt and helping to track down information that you need to be able to fill out these questions. What we're hoping is that because these underserved communities lack the capacity, by working together with colleges and universities and giving the opportunities for students to have internships, we can give the communities what my friend calls an at-bat. Though the description that he always uses is thinking about a baseball stadium. And what we're trying to do is make sure that that community isn't just standing outside the baseball stadium looking in, but that they actually get a chance to get to the plate and have an at-bat. There's no guarantees that they'll get the funding, but we're trying to do everything that we can to give them the capacity so that they have a chance to make their community better. One of the things that was really also beneficial for me as a student who did grant writing for my internship is that I gained a marketable skill. And so I was able to find something that I could do that could be really beneficial in looking for future jobs. In some cases, I actually have a couple friends who they were the ones who wrote the grants, and they ended up basically creating their job because they were the ones who then went on to administer the grants that the community received. The nice thing about grant writing as an internship is that it can be done a lot more flexible. And with hours, I know, I was able to work some nights and weekends, and being able to get my hours in to meet my educational requirements and get those skills, but also not make it so that I had the huge burden of having to quit a job that was paying my bills to be able to meet that educational requirement. We also know that a lot of students are looking for less traditional jobs. We're seeing, a massive influx. I feel like every day I get in my news feed information about people doing side hustles and what they're doing that's allowing them to be more flexible. And so the nice thing about grant research and writing is it's a marketable skill for people who are looking for less traditional office jobs. So I wanted to give you an example of what we're currently working on right now with the University of Delaware. We and the Virginia Tech. So Tyanek, Alaska, it is west of Anchorage. It is a very remote area. You have to travel by plane or by boat. There's no access by roads. They have a number of projects that they're working on, trying to revitalize the community, bring people back, create jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But because they have all of these projects, they need to be able to plan in a smart way. And so we have students from Virginia Tech who are working on developing a land use plan, working with a professor from the University of Anchorage. We're also working with the University of Delaware on a grant writing effort to both preserve the Dena'ina language as well as to build a cultural center. And at the heart of the cultural center is the language. And so we currently have 3 students who are working with a team of federal employees. We have a grant writer from an NGO who's a volunteer. We have another NGO who's providing some additional technical support, a few schools. And then we also are working with a private company on this effort. And so we have a lot of different things that are going on, but basically one of the things that we're trying to do with this is trying to give students opportunities that they can do a little bit more flexible, but also really helps get at the heart of the communities who have these needs.
While we're waiting for folks to drop stuff in the chat, I kind of was listening for some through lines between everybody's presentations. And one of the things that kind of kept coming back to me was the notion of capacity issues, whether it's because capacity is severely limited because of a destructive storm or flood or something, or simply working with community partners that are already, I mean, the nonprofit sector and the government sector, depending on where you're looking at, are already doing far more than a single job in their hands. So thinking about how do we all work together to engage community, but in a way that doesn't contribute to this capacity failure, I guess, and thinking about what are some examples or some ideas that folks have or have seen work well with them. I know Courtney mentioned really kind of training people and making less mystical the grant writing process. I think people really think of like, you're a grant writer, that's like a special, you've had all these skills, but really it's much more accessible than I think the framing of it is. But yeah, I'll stop babbling and just open it up. What are some examples of ways that we can, without taxing communities, really try and meet people where they are? And
one of the big things that we're also really trying to look at across the board in the federal government right now is what are our barriers and what are things that we can reduce to make it so that access to funding is a lot easier. I know USDA is looking at getting rid of some of their matching requirements because I know that that's one of the biggest barriers for communities. They don't have funding to put forward to be a match. And so one of the things that I think is really helpful for working with you all is that you're out with the communities and you hear about these barriers and being able to share that information with people who can actually, get those processes in place. And right now the time is very ripe where we're all looking at our grant programs and looking at how those barriers are really impacting communities. So feedback or ideas that you have or things that you've heard would be definitely of interest if you have that you'd like to share so that we can kind of push that forward to try to kind of force it. The other thing too is that there's a lot of gaps because as we're dealing with disasters and as I mentioned with the one project in Colorado from fire, there are impacts from disasters that we've not even thought about yet. And so there may be ways that we have to be more creative moving forward. And so by being able to work together and being able to make those connections across these different organizations, I think we can find solutions that we wouldn't be